Hey, welcome back guys to the channel. I'm Nate. Now, usually I'm talking about growing side hustles, growing your Amazon business and all of that. Today we are doing a slightly different video. I want to talk about the end goal, the goal line here, retiring. Okay, most of us don't plan on working and hustling and doing all this stuff for the rest of our lives. Most of us have this goal of, well, we want to spend time with our family. We want to enjoy life. Maybe we want to take up, I don't know, painting, whatever it is. We have other interests that we want to get into, and we don't all want to just make money forever. Money isn't the goal. It's what money gets for us. That's the goal, which is usually freedom. Freedom of time, freedom of location, all of that stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about the end goal because I feel like most people don't really have a good grasp of what this end goal looks like, how much money they actually need to retire, how long it's going to take them to get there, what life looks like after retirement. So I want to start this with a redefinition of what retirement means. I've talked to a lot of people over the years, and usually when I say the word retirement, the thing that comes to their mind is, okay, you've worked for 70 years or whatever, and then you sit on a couch and you watch TV all day. And when I say, like, yeah, I plan to retire pretty early, I want to retire in my 30s, they immediately think, wow, that's going to be such a boring life, because they are defining retirement as sitting on the couch and doing nothing for the rest of your life. I think that the definition of retirement should be freedom. I think it should be this idea that I no longer have to work. I don't have to go to my job to make money. I can if I want to, but it's that freedom to do whatever you want. If you want to sit on the couch and watch TV for the next 70 years, so be it. You can do that. If you want to go move to, I don't know, South America and start a school down there, you can do that. If you want to part-time in a coffee shop, or if you want to become a scuba instructor, or want to sit on a beach, or you want to become a professional surfboarder or a professional actor, okay, all those things are options because you no longer have to go to a job in order to make money, in order to pay your bills. You can do whatever it is that you want. Okay, so that's what I think we should redefine this retirement idea as. How much do you need in order to get there? Well, people much smarter than I have done all sorts of calculations, and generally the idea that they fall on is that you need roughly 25 times your yearly expenses, not your yearly income, but your yearly expenses. So I want you guys to tally up, what are your yearly expenses? What's your mortgage? What does it cost for food, car, transportation, insurance if you're paying for that, all of those different expenses. What are your expenses? What is going out of your bank account every single year? Take that number and multiply it by 25. And that is roughly how much you'll need to retire, okay? The reason why it's 25x is because there's a concept, they call it the 4% rule. It's a really interesting study where basically taken lump sum, like let you start with $1 million or whatever. And they've tried this throughout the years. And say, okay, if you start with $1 million and you retire in 1982, will you last for 30 years, okay? And this has almost a 100% success rate. Success meaning you last years and you don't have $0, okay? It was something like 90% of the years, like no matter if you retired like the first year, the Great Depression, okay? So like 1930, whatever. Even if you retired that year, even that didn't have a failure rate after 30 years. In fact, it never failed. It just continued to grow forever if you were withdrawing 4% of your investments, okay? And when I'm talking about investments, I'm talking things like you have broad market index funds where it's like, instead of trying to play the stock market, it's like, oh, which one to do good? Oh, I should buy Apple. Oh, I should buy Nvidia or whatever. This is just like you put a penny into every company that exists. It's a total market index fund, something like the S&P 500, VT-SAX. So those are total market index funds where it's just, you got a little bit in everything, okay? We're not trying to beat the market. We're not trying to outsmart Wall Street. We're just going along for the ride. We're gonna put a penny in everything, and if everything rises, then we will rise, okay? And on average, the S&P 500, I'll keep using that as sort of our benchmark. The S&P 500 on average over the past 100 years has gone up a little over 10% every single year. So if you started with $1 million, on average, the next year you'd have 1,000,000.1. You have 1,100,000 the next year. The next year, 10% of that. Okay, and so on and so on and so on. Now, granted, there are down years and up years. So some years the S&P 500 has lost 19%. Other years the S&P 500 has shot up 30%. So there are ups and downs, but when you average it averages out to about 10%, just year over year over year. Okay, if you're growing by 10% and you are withdrawing 4%, even when we account for inflation, and on average, inflation is about 2%, maybe 3% in a bad year, 4% on like a bonkers crazy year. Even if we're hitting those types of inflation numbers, we would still be okay. If the money is growing by 10%, we're withdrawing 4%, and inflation is cutting out 2, maybe 3% of that, we're still fine. That money would continue growing forever. Now, you don't have to follow this to a T. There's no one like behind you whipping you like, oh, you gotta withdraw your 4%. If we have another event like the Great Depression, all right, well, maybe you can either lower your spending that year, maybe you can lower it to like a 3% withdrawal rate, or maybe you get a job at a coffee shop for 1 year just so you can like pay groceries so you don't have to withdraw your whole 4%. So you can withdraw like 2 or 3% because your coffee shop gig or your surfing instructor gig is paying you whatever you need to buy groceries that year, for example, okay? So this isn't like a hard science. I think when things fail, it's because people have tried to make this like a law, like, oh, you must 4%, even when it's a terrible year, and you will never change your lifestyle, and you will never like have a month where you like go out to eat anymore. It'll never adjust your expenses at all, and all of that, okay? So those are sort of the ideas. You can withdraw about 4% of your investments, and that is pretty safe. And what's interesting is that lasts basically forever. Some people think like, oh, well, that only lasts 30 years. There's a couple years you stick very rigid and you withdraw exactly 4% every year and you never change. I think if you retired in like 1966, you had a failure rate on year like 29. So if you retired at 66 and lived for 29 more years, you would die with $0 in your bank account. That's just exactly where it went. Almost every other 30-year period, no matter where you retired, has worked out where not only do you not hit zero, but your money has grown over time, which I think is really interesting. Okay, so we're going into this with a couple assumptions as far as what you need to retire. We are assuming that you can gain about 5% year over year after inflation. So whether you're putting your money into gold, whether you're putting your money into the S&P 500, whether you're purchasing rental properties, whether you're buying crypto, like whatever, wherever you have your retirement savings, we're assuming that can grow after inflation is accounted for. We're assuming it will grow safely by an average of 5% per year, which is very, very safe. Basically everything is higher than that, okay? We are also assuming, this is number 2, we are also assuming that you can safely withdraw about 4% every year, and we can adjust that as needed on crazy years. So we can pull that down to 3% or something if we have a Great Depression type of event. And our third assumption is that we plan forever. We don't plan on dying with zero. We plan on dying with a pretty good lump sum of money. We're not drawing down from our investments. Our investments are growing faster than we are withdrawing from them. Once you reach that level, then it doesn't matter. I mean, we could invent the spring of life, or like we could live for 300 years and it wouldn't matter, because as long as you are withdrawing less than your investments are growing year over year over year, then your investment nest egg, let's call it, will last forever. There is no timeline that you can stick to, okay? All right, so let's talk a little bit about that 5%. Year over year, the S&P 500 does about 10%. Housing market does about 4.8% on average. And what's interesting about the housing market is that's just your house appreciation. If you are, like, let's say you own a rental property, on average, it's appreciating by 4.8%. And also you are making money from it year over year over year. You're probably making about like 1% of the total mortgage per month in rental income, okay? So quite large if you own some rental properties. Crypto is astronomical. I'm not even gonna try to put a number on that because it's kind of crazy depending on what year you got into crypto and which cryptos you got into, but definitely more than 10% on average year. The average dividend, like if you have dividend stocks, so like you own like Pepsi, I think is a big dividend stock owner. On average, dividend stocks pay about 4%. I've got 4.17% according to Google. And that's how much they're paying out, plus they're appreciating as well. So you sort of get both the appreciation as well as dividends paying out to you every single month. Gold was about 10% year over year, averaged out over a period. Okay, so pretty much everything across the board is hitting this benchmark of getting about 5% of an increase in our investments. Like our investments can make more investments. Our money is making itself, okay? It's multiplying. Now, the withdrawal rate, the 4% withdrawal rate, a little bit about this. If, on average, your investments are growing by 5%, then clearly you can withdraw 4% and still grow 1% every single year. And this is calculated after inflation and all of that. And subsequently, so some people will be like, okay, well, I don't know what my gonna be when I'm 60. They might be a lot more than they are now. First, I'm gonna challenge that and say, no, they're not. That's wildly unlikely. Second, if your investments are growing by 1% every single year, then by the time that you're 60 or 70, you don't have to withdraw 4%. It is very unlikely that we will have invented time travel or invented some sort of infinite life type thing. So if by the time you hit 70, you could probably start withdrawing 5% or 6% or 7%. By the time you hit 80, you probably withdraw 10% to 15%, because by that point, you could withdraw down to zero, because you're probably not going to live a whole lot past 89, maybe 100, okay? But you can withdraw down to after a certain point. The risk of hitting zero, negligible, much later in life, when potentially like maybe you get cancer and you live in hospice for 10 years and you're paying like 10 grand a month. Okay, so it'd be an extraneous circumstance. But at that point, if you have cancer and you're living in hospice, you don't need your nest egg to last forever. So you can withdraw more than 4% at that point, because it's okay if you start drawing down from your principal. It's okay if you're drawing more than your investment is growing, because you're gonna die soon, okay? All right. Usually our cost of living will go down. Also, there's things like Social Security and Medicaid that will all kick in, that will help those medical costs, that will help extra income coming in every single month. Maybe you have a pension, maybe your spouse has a pension, maybe you move in with your kids' life, or maybe they want the free babysitter and so they invite grandma over and they have a little bedroom. Like very often, not always, but very often, the later in life that you get, the lower your expenses become compared to in like our phase of life. Like we've got 4 young kids, we're gonna be doing sports, we're looking at like, okay, annual expenses right now are very high and they should only get lower as our kids start to leave, okay? So yeah. Another factor to consider is usually later in life, you have paid off your mortgage. So mortgage is often one of your biggest, if not the biggest expense in your yearly income. I was looking up a figure, I think it was about $20,000 on average is what people are paying per year, maybe a little bit higher than that. But if your house was paid off, well, that's $20,000 that you no longer need. So as far as like how much money you need to retire, if your yearly expenses are $20,000 less, multiply $20,000 by 25, we get $500,000. That's $500,000 less that you need in your retirement nest egg, assuming that you're paying about 20 grand per year just in your mortgage, okay? That's substantial, okay? So what do numbers look like? Let's use some real life math. I'm gonna pull up a calculator here. So what does some real math look like? Let's say you're like our family. We'll go in with a family of 6, okay? Let's say a family of 6, your expenses, and some people are like, oh, about taxes, what about that? Your tax is not a yearly expense. You pay tax on your income. So if you have no income, you pay no tax. Tax is not a yearly expense. It just lowers your income. It does not increase your expenses. If you make nothing, then you are not paying income taxes if you're not making income, okay? So forget about that idea. Are not important here. All of it's already been paid. It's whatever your day job is, you pay the taxes, and then you invested, often with like Roth IRAs, things like that. It's like it's after tax, so you don't have to worry about this later in life, okay? So let's say you've got a family of 6. I pulled up Google. So according to Google, the average family spends about 70 or 80,000 per year in expenses, okay? So there's like mortgage, food, transportation, all gets wrapped up. There's like, you probably spend about 10 grand a year on groceries. You probably spend about 10 grand a year on like car payments and gas and insurance and that stuff. You probably spend about 20, 25 on your mortgage. Okay, there's 5 to 10 grand on fun stuff, extracurriculars, all of that. Okay, so all of that goes into your, and again, keep in mind, you can control a lot of that once you no longer have to go to work. If you don't have to drive to work, do you still need 3 vehicles, 2 vehicles, 1 vehicle? Do you be paying car insurance on that stuff? Once you're over the age of 65, do you still need to be paying your medical insurance? Well, you got Medicaid now, okay? There's a lot of, once your mortgage is paid off, you still need to be paying your mortgage every month. So there's a lot of these things that can fluctuate and significantly decrease once you take the requirement of a job out. It's actually pretty wild when you think about this. It's wild how much money we spend in order to have the ability to make money. Once you take out that factor of I have to go make money, there's a lot of expenses that you can just completely negate because you no longer have to pay for that second car so that you can drive to work because you only need 1 car. Your kids probably moved out. Even if they didn't, like if you're not going to work and your spouse isn't going to work, I mean, do your kids, they can purchase their own cars. We don't have to buy them their own car. There's nothing that says that, okay? We can drive them all in 1 vehicle. We can drive to the grocery store in 1 vehicle. We can go on vacation in 1 vehicle. We don't have to have 2 cars. So there's a lot of these that you can adjust, okay? So let's say that your yearly here are $80,000. We're gonna multiply this by 25. That brings us at $2 million. So if your yearly expenses are about $80, then you need roughly $2 million to, in our theoretical calculated world, theoretically, you could live forever. You would never have to work again. It doesn't matter how long you would go because you can safely withdraw 4% of this. If you withdraw 4%, so we're gonna take 2 million, we'll multiply it by 0.04, so that's 4%. There's 80,000. Okay, that's where this 25x multiple comes from. So if we have 2 million, and we are withdrawing 4%, but our 2 million is growing on average by 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% year over year, then this will last forever, okay? If there's a down year, we can withdraw a little bit less. If there's an up year, we can withdraw a little bit more, okay? There's nothing hard set in stone. This just gives us the ballpark to know what we need. A lot of people think they need like millions and millions, or they need this huge social security or the massive pension in order to survive. And it's really not that much. I mean, don't get me wrong, $2 million is a lot of money. I can't just be like, oh yeah, let me just run to the bank. Sure, I'll give you a $2 million loan. But there's a lot more people than you would think that are able to save this much money when we are including things like your house equity, when we're including things like your other assets that you own. If you own a business, your business is worth some money. If you have an inventory basement, your inventory in your business is a part of this. Like, how many Amazon sellers have 100 grand just sitting in inventory they're trying to sell? A lot of them, okay? So all of this is sort of accounted for in this equation. As long as your investments can, on average, 5% or more after inflation, then you're good to go, okay? Now, what happens if this fails, if this doesn't work, okay? And this is the part that I like getting into. Again, people kind of think of a reason to continue working. So at the beginning of the video, you remember I said, when I've told people that I want to retire in my 30s, they think, wow, that's gonna be such a boring life. I could never do that. I wouldn't know what to do with myself. I immediately think, like, wow, you must live such a boring life if you find your life purpose by going to a job every single day, if that's where you find your purpose. There's so many other things that you could be doing with your time to make a difference in the world or in your life or in your family's lives. Why are you going to work if you don't have to, okay? And it's because of that dichotomy. It's because they are defining as sitting on the couch all day and doing nothing. I am defining retirement as I don't have to go to work in order to make money, in order to continue living. Therefore, I can do anything that I want. If I retire in my 30s, well, I might continue doing YouTube videos. I might start a school in South America. I might get more foster kids. I might adopt more kids. Like, there's so many options that are open to us because I don't have to go to work from 9 to 5 anymore. Your life it's just limitless possibilities. I could try to become an actor. Maybe I want to do that. I've got a friend who retired at police pension. He got injured and he's in his 30s, but he doesn't have to work again. And so he's just like, well, I always kind of wanted to become an actor. So he's trying to make it work and he's getting into TV shows. He's getting into films and things like that. He's working his way up. And it doesn't matter that he's really not making a whole lot of money as an actor because he's retired. So he can do that. He has those options. And that's really the key here. Okay. So what if this fails? What if you're withdrawing 4% and we hit like Great Depression type of event again, where the stock market crashes 50% overnight and you go from 2 million down to 1 million? You're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? I'm going to have to go back to work. So what? This worst case scenario, like let's say I retire with $2 million in my 30s. And then let's say sometime in like my 40s or 50s, there's this Great Depression type of event that happens. Okay, my worst case scenario is, well, I guess I'm gonna go back and get a job for a couple years. Maybe I'll go work at a coffee shop. I don't need to make a lot of money. I can make, I don't know, 20 bucks an hour, 40 hours a week. That's decent money. Okay, that could get us through a rough year. My worst case scenario is everybody else's normal everyday case scenario. They're working every single day into their 40s, 50s, 60s, sometimes 70s. My worst is joining back with them for a year or 2 or 3. Okay. And that's absolute worst case scenario if the unthinkable happens. Okay. And okay, sure. If the economy completely collapses, well, then everyone's gonna die pretty soon, right? Like there's so many bigger problems out there. So I love this concept of this worst case, like this fails, we start more than it's growing. Okay, well then let me just get a part-time job. Let me drive for Uber for a year. Let me do whatever. Like let me tide this over. So there's so many other options that you can do things like geo arbitrage. Okay, so if you're here and you're an Amazon seller, you're doing online arbitrage or retail arbitrage, something called geo arbitrage, which actually I know we've got a friend in our Hustle Buddies Facebook group who is an Amazon seller, but he's moved over to Philippines because he can live in this like penthouse suite in the Philippines, and his rent for this penthouse massive suite for his family, all the groceries, everything like that, I think he said he pays $500 a month in like total expenses. It's crazy how cheap you can live somewhere else if you're not tied to a geographical location. If our money is just in these passive investments that will just continue to grow, I don't have to live in Florida to work in Florida. Like I can live in Colombia, I can live in the Philippines, I can live in or Portugal, okay? And I think that shouldn't be taken for granted. Those are big things, okay? So there's a lot of adjusting and wiggling that you do to make this work. And again, like my worst case scenario is I just go and work for a little bit and I make a little bit more money. Or maybe you've hit this retirement number and you're doing something that you truly enjoy. Maybe you are making YouTube videos and you are teaching other people how to quit their day jobs and how to retire early and live more meaningful lives with their family. And maybe you find that very fulfilling. Then keep on doing it. Okay, you hit your retirement number, so you don't have to make that video. You don't have to help other people make money. You don't have to continue teaching people things, but you just love it so much that you keep on doing it. And so like, I don't know, maybe you're making the 80 grand a year because remember your yearly expenses were 80 grand. So you got your 2 million, but you love what you're doing and you're making 80 grand a year. Okay, do it for another year. Do it for 2 years, do it for 3. Keep doing until you don't love it anymore and then do something else. It's that freedom of choice, the freedom of options. You don't have to go to work and it just changes your worldview. The world is your oyster. It's a giant playground and you truly can do whatever you want. So this is stuff that really excites me. Hopefully this was a little bit interesting to you, a little bit eye-opening. If you have any questions, feel free to write them down in the comment section below. I'll include a couple links to a few of the articles that talk about this. And again, like arguments against it, like, oh, there are a few years where the rule did fail. Okay, so rebuttal, just don't withdraw 4% every single year, like whatever. No one's whipping you back. Withdraw 3% one year and you'll be fine. Also, you can die with 0, so you can withdraw more than that later in life. People who talk about healthcare costs. Okay, well, yeah, that'll go up, but your mortgage will weigh, your kids' education expenses mostly weigh. And just a side note, don't pay for your kids' college, guys. Ugh, it's a topic for a different video, but don't do it, okay? So many ways that you can adjust this to make your worst case scenario somebody else's everyday case scenario. Maybe I go back and I get a job at Starbucks and I work 20 hours a week for a couple years. That's fine, okay? That's fair. I can do that in my 40s, 50s. In fact, I would rather do that in my 50s after my kids have all left the house than in my 30s, because they say 98% of all of the time you will ever spend with your child is between the ages of 1 to 18. So why would I choose to be all these hours between the ages of 1 and 18 when I could choose to retire early? And then worst case scenario, I work a little bit after they're already out of the house. Okay, so hopefully that opened some eyes, got your gears turning a little bit. If you disagree with any of the math that I wrote here, let me know. Write it down in the comment section. I'm happy to have a civil discussion about this. I'll probably disagree with you, or I'll probably have some good rebuttals for it, but I'm happy to discuss this. This is something I'm really passionate about. It's something my wife and I have been working towards for a while. We had a couple setbacks, but we're definitely actively trying to work towards this idea of financial independence, where our passive income is greater than our expenses. All right. We'll see you in the next one, guys. Go make some money.